Hi, my name is Matt Shannon. I am an assistant wrestling coach in Independence, as well as the owner of Shannon Wrestling and Timing. I first met Wyatt when I was in high school in the early 2000s. And I got to know him as the predicament photographer guy. I'd see him at all the events, or whatever events he was covering for us, and just see him there taking pictures and get to know him and get to talk to him. And then after he got to know him, he'd always come up and say something to you. Very social guy, and my family got to know him throughout the years. And I remember as a kid, we'd always get excited, when we were in high school. Okay, Wyatt was at this meet. Okay, what pictures did he pick? And he would always log on to see which two pictures they picked from each weight class, if one of yours was one that got on the predicament site. And fortunately, I do have a few of those pictures that I've got saved at home that he did take. And then throughout the years, he got to know my family. With his trucking route, he would stop and talk to my dad in Cedar Rapids, where my dad worked at, and we really got to know him well. And then as the years went by, talked to him more and more, always excited to see him come up and talk to you, see how things are going. I started my wrestling tournament business and started running tournaments here and there. And it got to the point where he was seeing that, and he's like, well, where are you going next week? And I'd tell him, I'm going, whatever place it was. And, all right, I'll be there too. What time are you going to get there? I'd tell him what time I was planning to set up. I'll get there at 6:30. All right, I'll be there then. And sure enough, he was known for this. He did it to me all the time. I tell him 6:30, be 6:28. Where are you at? I'm just pulling into town here. Well, I've been waiting for you. You're late. No, I've got 2 minutes, Wyatt. I knew him to be one that get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but he went to bed at 9 o'clock at night. So he was always willing to go. He was always willing to help. Always had his coffee, handed pens out to everybody. And then at those events, he was very great help setting things up. Wasn't afraid to try something new, learn new bits of equipment, to the point where he was starting to take equipment for me and setting them up at events. If I couldn't make it there right away to set up, he'd take stuff down, start setting up, with this cargo van that he bought. He loved his cargo vans. And he'd have it all set up, but he was learning how to do this stuff. He was excited to he wanted to understand everything with wrestling, and he got to the point where he was running some of the tournaments on his own. And he'd call me or text me and show me, hey, I got this new TV monitor for my computer so I could watch the video feed or whatever, and he'd text me these pictures, and he was really excited to learn that stuff. And this happened more and more through the years. And when he got closer, the year before he retired, he kept telling me, I've only got so many days left. And then I'd ask him, well, what are you going to do with all your free time now that you're going to be retired? Well, I'm going to go and help you run wrestling tournaments. I kind of laughed at him, and like, okay, yeah, if you want to, that's fine, I'll take you. So he would, and he stuck to his word. He would show up at these tournaments. He would call me. He finally got a schedule down. He was going with me almost everywhere, all across the state of Iowa, everything from youth tournaments, high school tournaments, state tournament. We even did a Florida tournament together. We both flew down to do this tournament. They were trying to get to be really big, just wanted us to run it. The tournament being a lot smaller than what it was, so we were done by I think 1 o'clock that day, this national tournament down there, because they only had 120 entries. And we ran over and we got a tour of NASA. So we did a lot of traveling together with that, a lot of those events. Even when I started the timing side of my business, doing cross-country track and field, he was more than happy to help me with that too. He'd go meet me at those places, help set up, help me run the events. And one thing I remember, besides the pens, which I've got a collection for a lifetime, I'm sure, besides the stickers he started handing out, the predicament shirts I have, the one thing I'll remember is actually two things. At multiple day events, I had to take him out to eat somewhere nice, like Texas Roadhouse. That was one of his favorite places to go on the route. Didn't want Domino's. Absolutely hated it if I had to order Domino's in. A lot of times we get done late, and that's the only place that's open. So he's like, oh, anything but Domino's. So Texas Roadhouse became a tradition for us if it was a multiple day event, and we had the time. And then I'd always notice, typically hotel rooms come with 2 bars of soap, and 1 bar of soap would always disappear. And I couldn't figure out for the longest time, why, where the other one went. And I finally figured out. I finally asked about it. I said, where's this going? Well, it turns out he likes to take one of the bars of soap, throws it in this bag, takes it home, and I guess he told me he's got this bucket of soap from hotels he collects, so that way he doesn't have to buy soap anymore. And he's had this, I don't know how many years. I've never asked Kirsten about it either, but so though that's one thing there are a couple things there that I remember with him. I will appreciate his friendship and the help he gave me, at those events, and we'll keep wrestling on the move.
Hey, Mark Ironside here. Wyatt was, to me, just like he was to everybody else, just an amazing friend that always greeted everybody with a smile. He wanted to talk wrestling no matter where he was at, what time of morning it was, what time of night it was, it didn't matter. He was always open to a great conversation of wrestling. He's one of the best friends that you could possibly ever ask for. He would do anything for you, day or night. The guy slept probably less than anybody I've ever known. He is going to be dearly, dearly missed. God bless his family, all the people that were close to him, and he's going to be truly, truly missed for years to come at wrestling events. The biggest thing I'm going to miss is just that smile on his face, a guy with no enemies. Everybody loved him. How could you not love Wyatt Schultz? So sad that he's gone, but his memories are going to last us forever, and very, very special persons. People like that, like Wyatt, they're never forgotten. They'll be with us forever. God bless you, family. Love you all. Love you, Wyatt.
Jeff Foss from West Delaware. One of the things that stood out to me about Wyatt is if he was in your gym for a dual meet or for a tournament, he gave credibility to that event. Because if he was there, you knew that duel had some significance. You knew that there were going to be some big matches in that duel, and he was there to cover that for the wrestling community. And Wyatt and I always had a little thing going back and forth where I'd be sitting at a tournament and Wyatt would call me. My phone would ring and I'd look and I'd see his name. And I answered it the first time and I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" He goes, "Hey, you got any dogs for sale?" And it was right in the middle of a tournament, and because he knew we raised labs, and he'd always ask me if I had any pups for sale. So I would see Wyatt on TV covering an event, and I would send him a text. At first, I'd take a picture of the TV and I'd send him a text, say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'd see him look at his phone, get a smile on his face, and then between matches or after the match, he would, we'd strike up a conversation. But my wife and I went to Fargo to watch one of our wrestlers, Wyatt Volker, wrestle. And sure enough, it was a big event. Who did we see down at the mat when we got there? It was Wyatt. So I took a picture of him, sent it to him, said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Because he didn't know we were coming to the event. And sure enough, within minutes, he was up talking to us. And, he was always there supporting the different wrestling events. And if you ever saw him, he was going to take time out of what he was doing to have a conversation with you and talk to you. And, we're sure going to miss Wyatt's presence in the gyms. But his legacy is going to live on forever as one of the greatest supporters of wrestling in the state of Iowa. And, Wyatt always said, "Let's keep wrestling on the move." We're sure going to miss you.
Hi, my name's Dewey Hupke, and I am the assistant junior-senior high school principal in Independence. But prior to coming to Independence, I was a wrestler and grew up in a family with 2 older brothers. And so knowing of the predicament, before I moved over here to Independence from Northwest Iowa, I believe Wyatt was involved with purchasing the predicament from, I believe, the Siemens from Emmitsburg. And I knew of Wyatt. I kind of had him up on this pedestal that pretty important person, because he was a very influential person in the sport that I love dearly, wrestling. So when I got over here, I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I get to meet a guy that I had known about, and so I was just really honored to get to know him. But then it developed into more than just knowing of Wyatt. Then he would walk into our office, and I would hear our secretary say, Mr. Putz or Mr. Shannon, Wyatt Schultz is here to visit with you. And when I heard that, I would walk out and greet Wyatt. It was always special because he was always so not popular, but positive. And he was always so positive about what's going on in the sport of wrestling, and such a person that always wanted to promote the great things our student athletes, our wrestlers, are doing, not only in Independence, not only in the state of Iowa, but nationwide. And he was really a leader in promoting a great sport that we are all near and dear to. And one of the last times I met Wyatt last spring, not met him, but visited with him, it's kind of ironic, but he gave me a bunch of predicament stickers. And I told him, I said, hey man, I'm gonna put it on the back of my phone. And so on the back of my phone, he gave me 3 of them. On the back of my phone, there's the predicament. On my computer, I have a sticker, the predicament. And on another computer there's my sticker. So needless to say, Wyatt Schultz, very good person. All of you know that, but somebody that left a lasting impression, not only on the sport of wrestling, but the great men and women who are involved with it. So proud that I got to spend time with him, and he would give me a bad time once in a while, but just an honor to know him and be able to call him a friend.
Got so many great memories about Wyatt. I loved pulling into high school parking lots on Saturdays in the winter months and seeing that big van with the plates G Wyatt, and knowing what was going to be waiting inside. You know, he's going to greet you with a gigantic smile, a vice grip handshake. There was going to be some good-natured ribbing, and you're going to have a lot of laughs when you're covering wrestling alongside him. And just so many things that I admired about the guy. He was a gem of a human being. His passion, commitment, and devotion to wrestling in the state of Iowa was unsurpassed. Loyal friend, incredible sense of humor, upbeat attitude, his work ethic. Think back to Thomas Gilman quote a few years back at the World Team Trials, where he talked about workhorses and show ponies, and Kyle Klingman and we used to play that clip repeatedly on our On the Mat podcast, and Wyatt was the consummate workhorse. It was never about him. It was always about the athletes on the mat, the coaches in the corner. He was never the story. He always told the story without being the story, and I admired that so much about him. And you know, as I reflect back on our friendship, a few things come to mind immediately, and probably back around 2012, 2013, when I was at the Des Moines Register, is when this started. And I'm a night owl. Wyatt, he's an early riser, and we'd be like 2 ships passing in the night. His day would begin right around when mine would end, and 3, 4 in the morning, you know, I'd get text notifications. I knew right away it was Wyatt. We'd trade texts back and forth, and you know, usually got his day started or my day ending with a laugh, and always appreciated those. And you know, I'd get to tournaments, you know, state tournaments, NCAA tournaments, and we'd have night sessions, and I'd always give him a hard time, ask him like, "Wyatt, you gonna be able to stay awake, or is this gonna be past your bedtime?" But in reality, I'm not sure if the guy ever slept. I just don't know how you can cram as much as he did into a day and still find time for sleep. But you know, one of probably my all-time favorite Wyatt memory came from 2014, and I was working on a project and leaned on him for a lot of help with it, and had a question and texted Wyatt. It's probably 7, 8 o'clock at night. Got a response right away, and had another question, and he responded right away, and I had a couple follow-ups, and I thought, rather than continuing to text him. I'm like, I'm just gonna knock this out with one phone call, and so I call him, and phone rings 5-6 times and no answer, and goes to voicemail, and I'm like, what in the world? Like, I know he's got his phone in his hand. He just texted me back 15 seconds ago, and I texted him. I'm like, what's the deal? You screening your calls now? And he responds, I'm not going to answer my phone when I'm right in the middle of eating my pudding. And so from that point forward, pudding became a punchline. It became a form of currency, and it also became a nickname. And you know, I'm not sure if I've had pudding in the last 7 years without thinking of Wyatt. And oftentimes I've taken a picture of it and texted it to him, and vice versa. And, you know, when there have been times that I've needed a photo from a tournament that I know Wyatt was shooting, I knew he wasn't going to take money for it. And so I knew the one thing that I could pay him with was pudding. And so I would take a 6-pack of pudding to Carver Hawkeye Arena. I'd take a 6-pack of pudding to the Unidome. Last year around Christmas time, I had Amazon ship him some pudding as well. And so in addition to that, whenever we would run a photo that Wyatt would take, if you look back on Track Wrestling and you look at the photo credit, it will say Wyatt Pudding Schultz. And so oftentimes in the last few years, I would call him Pudding. But, you know, just, you know, so many great memories with the guy, and he taught me so much, and especially about photography. I think back to 2016 when I started Track Wrestling, one of our biggest challenges was finding enough photos to go to accompany stories. And so I went out and I purchased a camera. I figured I would teach myself how to use the camera, and I leaned on Wyatt quite a bit for help with it. And he was such a great mentor for me with the camera. And I used to sit next to him at tournaments, and he would teach me camera settings and teach me how the camera worked and the intricacies of wrestling photography. And little did he know, though, that what he was teaching me was going to be used against him. And I filled my albums with Wyatt photos throughout the last several years. And you know, oftentimes he seemed like he was either amused or annoyed by me taking photos of him all the time. And either of those were perfectly good reasons for me to keep turning the camera towards him and snapping away. And I'm certainly glad that I did, because last couple weeks I've reflected on those times that we've shared together. Just you know, looking at those photos brings a smile, and you know, brings back a lot of great memories of sitting beside him at tournaments. And you know, my final tournament that you know, I covered alongside him, I think back to the final frame that I took of him, and it was down in Coralville this spring at Senior Nationals, and I was sitting alongside him, and my back was bothering me sitting along the hockey boards there, and so found this chair mat side, and so I moved, and it wasn't long after that Wyatt was giving me a hard time about not being able to hack it along the hockey boards, and he sent me a text message, and it made me laugh. And as I was reading it, I look over and he's laughing, and I snapped this photo of him. And that photo alone pretty much encapsulated our relationship for the past 22 years. And we, you know, for all the great times that we had covering wrestling together, and there were tons of them, and tons of serious conversations too. But the thing that I'm going to remember the most are just all the laughs, all the jokes, all the nonsense, all the great times that we had covering wrestling. And certainly going to miss him a lot, but going to do my best to follow the example he set, and continue to carry out his mantra and keep wrestling on the move.
My name's Gary Anderson. I'm one of the coaches here at Independence, and just want to talk about Wyatt here a little bit. I did get to know Wyatt just through Independence Wrestling and working with him at wrestling tournaments. Actually, Wyatt knew me before I knew him, and he's just one of those guys that's really special to wrestling. One quick story I can tell you, he always had pens on him, and it was kind of a thing where he would give Matt Shannon, Coach Shannon, a better pen than me, and I'd always go up to him, hey, what's going on here? And it's just something that he'd quietly joke about, and you know, he kind of got me going. But definitely going to miss him, Great guy, really good for the sport.
Back in the early 90s, Wyatt Schultz walked into the Jayhawk wrestling world. He had a couple of neighbor kids that were on the team and wanted to take pictures of him. So he came over, sat Matt's side, of course, and took some pictures. Later introduced himself and said he'd like to take some pictures that, throughout the season, which ended up being multiple seasons. And he would provide prints of the wrestlers at the end of the season. And I mean, we had literally tables full of prints that Wyatt provided at no charge at all to the kids. And that's kind of how he got started with Jefferson High School. He kind of did that until he purchased the Predicament Wrestling magazine and then spread out across the state. And another thing that he and Kirsten did was they helped with our preceding the Jayhawk Invitational Tournament. Wyatt spread across Jefferson High School many sports and activities and contributed so greatly that the administration bestowed an honorary diploma that was given to him at graduation ceremonies in the Cellular Center. Some of the things professionally that Wyatt did was he bought and resurrected the Predicament Wrestling magazine, I think 3 times. 1 initially, and then 2 when it kind of came back to him after he sold it, and then the third resurrection was going from print media to electronic media, and had to kind of revise it in that respect. Also, he was instrumental in bringing the Dream Team All-Star Meet to Iowa, and that is the All-Star Meet where one state takes on the rest of the United States. So maybe, for instance, Iowa would provide an All-Star team, and they would bring in all of the All-Stars from throughout the country. And he not only brought that in, but he many times would help provide transportation, set up housing for some of the kids that might not have had it otherwise. He also provided a media outlet for the IWCOA in his Predicament website. He spearheaded the academic all-state team, and I think we can feel comforted and thankful that he was recognized in promoting in the efforts he did to promote the sport. He was awarded the USA Wrestling Magazine Photographer of the Year in 1998, the National Wrestling Media Association Photographer of the Year, the IWCOA President's Award, the Dan Gable Museum Russ Smith Community Impact Award, and the Iowa Wrestling. He's a 2020 inductee in the Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame up in Cresco. Personally, some personal memories with Wyatt. I would have a satchel full of his pens already, and he'd always look at me and offer, "Want a pen?" And he'd have 3 of them in his hand with a big smile, knowing good and well that I had already had a bunch. His love of full-size vans, and the pride he had in showing me that his new used van, and of course his G. Wyatt plates on him, his mat side professionalism. We're up at Roanoke, Virginia, for the Division III Nationals, and I had a media pass, so I'm sitting next to him at mat side, and I must have cheered or something, and he quickly hushed me with a big smile and says, "Oh no, we can't do that here." And anyway, this is a real fun story. Jefferson had a fundraising auction, and one of the things that was auctioned off was a plane ride provided by my brother Don from Cedar Rapids up to Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, and then have steak dinner there, and then back. And so Wyatt purchased that the first year that it was offered, and he ended up after dinner he invited me, and we went up to dinner. So it was Don and Wyatt and I, and then he asked if we could fly around his home in Postville. And of course we did. Don's got it tipping on the wings, so we're looking down and he's pointing out, "Here's where my brother and I did this and that." And it was a lot of fun. Of course, he's taking pictures. Second year around, purchases that same dinner flight again. This time I'm not invited. He has John Haggerty, who was assistant coach at Jefferson, and then Kirsten, his girlfriend. So this is how the story is as far as I know it. They went up and they're having dinner, and Wyatt says, wow, we had such a great flight up and having such a wonderful dinner. Then he pulls out a ring and looks at Kirsten and says, will you marry me? And of course, Don and John are looking at each other going, kind of feeling a little bit uncomfortable. They excuse themselves, and that's how Kirsten and Wyatt became engaged and, of course, eventually married. Kind of a fun story. Our podcast, we had a lot of fun. KJ, Wyatt, and I'm not sure if anyone listened to us ramble, but we sure had fun. Whether it was wearing goofy Christmas hats, headgear, and official shirts, and having fun there. Being excited about hitting the big time when we got our pinning combination pennant on the wall at the Gazette building. There's no way I could keep up with the knowledge that he has of all of the high school wrestlers across the state and at all levels. It's not by accident that he knew so much. He worked hard. He had put in thousands of miles, took thousands of pictures, and impacted thousands of people with his presence. There will most certainly be a sadness when the season begins and the gyms across Iowa are one person less. Goodbye, my friend. Rest in peace.
I'm Michael Doyle, Independence head wrestling coach, and I'm going to talk about a good friend of mine, Wyatt Schultz, and some of the memories I have with him. I'm going to start with an event we had here at Independence. We used to call it Meet the Wrestlers, and names like Rulon Gardner, Dan Gable, Mark Ironside, Chuck Yagla, KJ Pilcher, Kevin Jackson, Chris Bono, and Wyatt Schultz were all different speakers we had at this event. And a memory I have of Meet the Wrestlers, I think it was our very first one, is an idea that we wanted to do to introduce our team to the public. And we asked Wyatt if he would help us out and come and be a speaker. And at the time I didn't know Wyatt real well, but he got up to speak. And if you know Wyatt at all, whatever he does, he's going to do with his whole heart. And we just told him, hey, like, if you can get up, kind of talk to these kids, 3, 5, maybe 10 minutes at the most, kind of give them a little message. And Wyatt got real personal with his talking about how important wrestling is to him and what it means to be a young person and take advantage of your opportunities. And after he gave that speech, I think half of our community was crying and realized how important wrestling is to him. And as a head coach, doing something for the first time, he nailed it. He did a really good job, and it's a speech that I think some of our alumni still reflect on. Another situation, Wyatt was really instrumental in doing outside the box things. He got us to talk or to meet with the people that run the Clash tournament up in Minnesota. We've competed in that tournament 2 times now, and Wyatt got that started. I remember the Dream Team Classic was held in Independence when we first built our school, and he was a big person in that. I remember him calling me saying, hey, we gotta have a really good speaker. Coach Doyle, you gotta know somebody that's a really good speaker. And I said, well, one of the best speakers I know is Coach Jim Miller at Warburg College. And he's like, oh man, that'd be awesome. You think you could get a hold of him? You think you could get Jim? You think you could get Millboy to come in and talk to the team? And I said, man, I can do it. And just always thinking, always promoting wrestling to anybody, any age. And probably the most important thing for me with him, this is going to be hard to get through here, it's probably with my son. He would always ask, how's Matthew doing? And, even when Matthew was, a 3rd grader, 4th grader, and now he's going to be a college sophomore, and Wyatt always wants to know how he's doing. Those are the memories I have of Wyatt.
Boy, it's been a sad week, but also one of a lot of great memories of a person that was a mentor to me, and a guy I'm going to miss going forward, and really miss the first time I go to a wrestling meet. Wyatt, you were such a great friend. and again, a great mentor. Kept wrestling moving forward. I just appreciated you so much. It was you always had a smile on your face. You're always happy to see me, and that was it. Kind of lifted me up even when I had down days. To see Wyatt, even if you knew there was a long day coming forward, and you saw Wyatt, it was just one of those. He made you feel better about yourself. He made you feel better about being where you were at, and that's what I always took from him. And it's been a sad week, and also one of the great memories of my good friend Wyatt, who was such a great friend to my place of business, the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier. He did so much for us. Always was reaching out and saying, "Hey, can I do anything more for you?" So that was the type of guy he was. And obviously, many of you guys are going to say this. I haven't bought a pen in probably 10 years because Wyatt always had 2 pens for me every time he saw me. So that's a lasting memory. Gonna miss you forever, Wyatt. Rest in peace.
Wyatt Schultz and I met in December of 2002. It happened to be the first year that I was covering wrestling for the Gazette. We were at Cedar Rapids, Kennedy for the 5 Seasons duels. And I saw this guy sitting in the corner taking pictures. So I figured I'd go sit down there and watch the finals. As soon as I sat down, he leans over and introduces himself, and we end up having a conversation that lasted as long as the championship duel. That was Wyatt Schultz. He had a passion for wrestling, and he was very outgoing. I'd like to think that was a unique moment that sparked our friendship. The truth of the matter is he had that type of moment with a lot of people. And it was because he had such a love for wrestling, and he enjoyed interacting with others. Luckily for me, it led to a friendship for about 20 years in and out of wrestling. We traveled to a lot of tournaments together. We covered a lot of the same events. We even took some short trips to events, going to football games and stuff like that outside of the winter season. Wyatt was a tireless worker, and he dedicated himself to shining a spotlight on wrestlers and the coaches that were devoted to make the wrestlers the best they could be on and off the mat. I remember in 2005 talking to Wyatt about what he did for the predicament. I remember him discussing 40 hours that he worked at Conway as a driver, and then another 40 that he worked towards supporting wrestling and promoting the sport through the predicament. I remember him saying it killed him not to get to every tournament when he'd actually go to multiple tournaments in a weekend. And at that point of the season, he had gone to tournaments at Independence, Parkersburg, and Fort Dodge while living in Cedar Rapids. Wyatt had such an admiration and respect for wrestlers and the coaches. He respected their hard work, being a farm kid from Pottsville. He knew exactly what it took and how much effort went in just to taking the mat. And that's one of the reasons why he loved the sports and the competitors so much. I still remember at the Meet the Wrestlers night at Independence, where Wyatt and I had the chance to talk to the families with Chuck Yagla. Wyatt didn't necessarily like public speaking, but he got up there to talk about his experiences and why he loved so much. A couple times he got emotional, and he knew he was going to, just because he had that type of affection for the sport and the people that were involved in it. He was always there to greet people with a smile, even though his back may be hurting or he'd been put in countless hours on photos and writing and editing and publishing the predicament. But he was always there with a smile to greet you. Had a great sense of humor. All he needed to do was have his cup of coffee, be around Kirsten, and be around the wrestling community. Wyatt was a fixture at meets all over the state, and he devoted a number of hours promoting the sport, not just through the predicament, but through other outlets. Personally, we got to work together for 10 years on the Pinning Combination podcast. And I know for a fact that on Mondays he would go to On Iowa Live, a television show on KCRG 9.2, and contribute to that. On Tuesdays, it was KGYM and the gym class. On Wednesdays, usually it was Dick Briggs and him and I doing the podcast. And that's in addition to going to meets the rest of the week. Many people will use the same adjectives to describe Wyatt Schultz. You'll hear words like ambassador, hardworking, selfless. The reason why they come up so much is because they're true. And that's what set Wyatt apart from many people. He was so dedicated to the sport of wrestling. He would do anything he could to recognize the efforts of the individuals on the mat and their coaches. He would do anything to promote the sport, help it grow. And usually he was willing to help anybody that needed it, even if it didn't result in anything for him. He would do it just because. Wyatt served the sport of wrestling well. He will surely be missed. And in his honor, I'd like to say, like he did at the end of all of our podcasts, and it was sprawled across the top of the predicament, let's keep wrestling on the move.
As someone who was in the type of business as Wyatt, I truly understood the demands that he was under, but yet you would never know there were demands because he never showed it. He never showed the stress. Whether it was in Fargo or any place else, when people wanted photos from him, he obliged. When people wanted rankings from him, he obliged. He was always there. He was more than a journalist. He was more than someone who loved wrestling. He was someone that we all benefited from knowing. We will truly miss Wyatt Schultz.
My name is Keith Donnelly. I'm assistant wrestling coach at Independence. I've had the opportunity to know Wyatt for many years. It started off when I was in wrestling, and I got to know him there. And now I've got to know him even better as a friend of the sport, as assistant wrestling coach here at Independence. And my family's got the opportunity to know him. I think if you ask anybody, they probably have many stories that they could share. I know I have several, but three that really come to mind to me. The first one, in 2005, we took 4 athletes to the state wrestling tournament, and we had all 4 of them in the semifinals. And we went 3 for 4 that evening. We put 3 in the finals, and we were down in the bottom of Vets Auditorium, and I just remember Wyatt coming down, and you could see him, and he wasn't on a run, but he was on a jog toward us, and I think he was more excited than our coaching staff was to see us put 3 in the finals, and we ended up getting a trophy that year. We placed 3rd as a team, but he came down, and he, I can remember he gave me a high five. He was the type of guy who he always pushed wrestling. He made it very important to, tell you good job. He went and, even told the athletes that, the one athlete who got beat, I remember, after a little period of time, he went over and told him good job, even though the match didn't go his way. So I'll never forget that night of him coming down into Vets Auditorium and the excitement on his face and the energy, that we had after that round. The second story, we were at the Benton tournament, and Wyatt was taking pictures of somebody, and so I walked over and I said, "Who are you taking pictures of now?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know." And I kind of looked back at him with a puzzled look, and I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "I don't know." And he looked at me and he was like, "Keith, for me it's not always about taking pictures of the best athlete or the ringers." He said, everybody wrestles, and to me that's a big deal. And as I walked away, it was impressive to know, for Wyatt, it really wasn't about if you're the best wrestler or not. He loved the sport. He was taking, at that point in time, he took pictures of somebody he didn't even know, and knowing him, I'm sure he made a connection with that athlete or that family at some point in time. The last story, probably the most memorable and most important to me, is Wyatt took pictures of our wedding. And we were in the back of the church, and there was a room, small room, and Wyatt saw this picture that he said that we needed to get pictures taken by. And when we went back there, it was extremely hot, extremely hot. There was no air movement at all. It was May, a really, really hot day. And the room was probably 5 feet by 8 feet. My wife and I were in there, and then Wyatt was taking pictures. And we got done taking pictures, and I wiped some sweat like off the side of my head, and I said, we got to get out of here, and I walked out the door. And my wife followed me, and then Wyatt followed me, and we were proceeding to walk up to get pictures in the front of the church. And he pulled me aside and he said, Keith, he said, your wife always exits a building or a room before you do. He said, that's common courtesy. And I'll never forget, you know, out of all the times we've been to restaurants, out of all the times we've been places, you know, we've always did that, but at that moment, I mean, it never even crossed my mind. And I appreciate the father figure moment of, you know, him just pulling me aside and saying, you know, from now on, your wife always, common courtesy, she always exits the room first, and I'll never forget that. So many stories, but those are three of my most memorable.
Wyatt Schultz, you are alive to me because at every single wrestling tournament I attend, you will be there with a smile and with a pair of shorts. I'm actually wearing a pair of shorts right now in your honor. I'm not going to scan down there because that'd be a little bit awkward. But just know, Wyatt, that you are a special man who carved out a special place in the sport of wrestling. Every tournament was better when you attended, and I'm not going to miss you because you're with me all the time. Wyatt, you're the best.